Clearly, talking about power 2 and 3-wheelers, users and then others who are affected by that is a really critical issue, as we've heard throughout the last week here. We've got a fantastic conversation planned and looking forward to hearing from some questions from you all at the end as well. And here to start, we've got some scene-setting remarks to talk a little bit about the data to frame today's conversation. Andrés Vecino-Ortiz is the Research Associate Professor at Johns Hopkins University, an expert in health economics and policy analysis focused on road safety. Thanks.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Ariana. Can we put the slide, please? Thank you. Great. So we have seen this figure for the entire conference. 1.2 billion people are dying of road crashes every year in the world. But the first thing that you look at is 85% of these are actually taking place in LMICs, most of them in these regions, 20% in African region, 12% in the region of Americas, almost 30% in Southeast Asia, and 25% in the Western Pacific region. And also when you look at the mode in which these people are dying from road injuries, you see that in the last 40 years, there has been an increase in cyclists. Pedestrians have been actually decreasing, especially since in the last 20 years. Vehicle drivers and passengers are increasing a little bit, but the most important change in the trend is actually in what is here, motorcyclists. This includes 2 and 3 power wheelers, which has increased in the last 40 years almost 100%. And that actually increase became worse actually in the last 20 years. So that's an issue, clearly. We're having a public health issue around mortality and injuries, non-fatal injuries, attributable to motorcyclists. Now, when you look at fleet participation in those regions that we were looking at before, you see that in the region of the Americas, 1 out of 4 vehicles is actually a PTW. You see that the same happens in Western Pacific region when it's 1 out of 3. In the African region is 14%. In Southeast Asia, 1 out of 2 vehicles are actually PTWs. So you see that there's a common issue here. You're seeing that we have a more or less stable trend in mortality that happens in some specific places. In those same specific places, we're seeing an important participation of PTWs, and those road users actually are increasing 100% in the last 4 years, around 50% in the last 20 years. So here's the growth in PTW ridership. In the African region has increased actually 100%. It's probably going to continue increasing as urbanization takes place. Region of the Americas is 67%, Southeast Asia 39%, and so on. So you see that globally, PTW ridership has more or less increased 30% with some regional variabilities that actually are consistent with those trends that we're seeing before in terms of mortality, in terms of percentage of the fleet. So there's clearly an issue. Now, any public health practitioner or epidemiologist will tell you there's an issue in terms of exposure, no? You're exposed to the risk, and of course, because if you're more exposed to the risk, you're more likely to die from that risk. But fleet is not explaining everything. We see here this data from the Global Status Report in Road Safety 2023, where you see that the percentage of fleet that is here in the x-axis, in the vertical axis, you see the percentage of road fatalities in PTWs. You see that there's perhaps one trend here, perhaps one trend here with a lot of variance, but it's not clear, right? So you cannot attribute everything to just the percentage of the fleet. It's not because, it's probably somehow because there is more exposure to PTWs, but it's not explaining everything. So, having said that, it makes sense to try to think about causes around motorcycle deaths from a safe system perspective. And if we take the 4 pillars of safe systems beyond post-crash care, with safe speeds, we see that oftentimes motorcycle speed at higher rates than the rest of vehicles. I work in the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety in the Americas. We work in 12 cities in this region. And in these 12 cities, in 10 of them, actually, motorcyclists speed at 2 or even 3 times rates higher than other vehicles. So there's clearly an issue on the speed for motorcycles. As a while ago, someone said, yes, of course, because that's actually the reason why these people in these very congested cities are actually using PTWs. And also difficult enforcement. Cities are trying to catch up with the fact that it's difficult to enforce motorcycle speeding because the plates sometimes are not visible. Electronic enforcement is more complicated. Swerving across lines makes it difficult for cameras to track speeding. So there's a lot of actually operational issues that make it difficult to ensure safe speeds for PTW users. Now, safe users, licensing and riding experience. This is becoming increasingly important. We're working with the IDV, trying to find out why is that, specifically in Latin America, there's more people actually riding motorcycles. Our colleague here, Luis Angel Guzman, actually presented some initial results showing that, for example, in the city of Bogota, where he's doing his work, 60% of people actually did not go through a training exercise, a training program before riding their motorcycles. So they're coming to the roads without the actual experience of riding a motorcycle. Then we see the safe users issue there. Of course, there are other ones, the traditional risk factors ones, drink driving, correct helmet use, which actually has a lot of variance. We are seeing in different cities percentages that go from 5–10% to all the way 98%. So there's a lot of room to improve there. Safe vehicles, we're seeing increasingly more push for safer PTWs, and that includes, of course, helmet standards, but also engine capabilities and the advanced rider assistance systems, ABS and airbags. In this same global status report for road safety, only about 30 countries had just 2 of the regulations on safer vehicles for PTWs. And finally, safe roads, which is also important. Here, this is statistics also from Americas showing that around, for example, 60% of, this is concrete in Bogota, 60% of people dying in the roads in 2022 were actually dying and not crashing but falling, highly associated with, for example, potholes, actually didn't have more than 2 years of experience riding a motorcycle. So you see the intersections there. Not experience, infrastructure issues, speeding, fleet participation that I mentioned before. So we see that there's a bunch of reasons why is that we're seeing that those increases in mortality. But there are other aspects beyond the safe systems approach that are also affecting road mortality deaths in PTWs. And one of them is, for example, transport mode change. In many cities after the pandemic, we started to see that people started to hop off the public transportation and using motorcycles. Why? Because it's more convenient, because public transportation systems have been reducing their quality, their coverage, and for that reason, people just use the motorcycle to get to the place they need to get. Also, employment opportunity. We're seeing increases in motor taxis, food delivery, and these services are important sources of income for communities, especially those countries in which we see a lot of informal employment. So that's also a key fact, how we make sure that those families continue to get their incomes, but in a safer environment. Symbolic capital, there are all these studies showing that having a motorcycle, speeding in a motorcycle might seem cool, might represent freedom, for example. Actually, in Los Angeles study, that was a key fact. So that's also another question, how you make sure that those social perceptions around the symbolic capital of PTWs are contrasted with a higher relative risk perception. And this is because, as public health practitioners, as expert transports, we see things top down, and we see that a lot of people are actually dying using PTWs. But from the individual perspective, it's possible that you are never even close to a crash. So if you're not even close to a crash, you might actually think that that's not going to happen to you. And that's what makes it really difficult to communicate to these communities. And all of these things actually represent what a public health problem is, no? It's the actual complexity of public health. This is a map of obesity. I also work on NCDs. You might actually be relieved that some of these, that PTWs are actually not as complex as, for example, obesity, but it is complex. There is a lot of different intersections of factors. It's exposure, it's the free participation, it is a lot of different aspects around safe systems. It is also the socioeconomic aspects around motorcycle or PTW ridership. So we have already evidence, a lot of evidence on policy solutions. We know that improvements in infrastructure work, some of them. We know that transport mode change is an issue. We have all this discussion around children as passengers. Licensing is very important, and also experience, riding. Helmet use in legislation and enforcement, we know that saves lives. Around 30% of people who die in motorcycles actually die only because of head injuries, and most of those injuries, not all, can actually be prevented with the use of an appropriate helmet. Helmet use standards, PTW vehicle standards, and speed legislation enforcement. We know that all these things actually work, but we're still lacking the implementation of them. And we're lacking the implementation of them because of the constraints. Financial constraints, there's perhaps not a lot of money for keeping and replacing PTW ridership for public transportation. Operational reasons, we see all the issues around enforcement. There are specific operational reasons why we're not enforcing as well as we would like. Regulatory aspects that are increasingly restrictions for example, speeding enforcement, and also political ones that make it really difficult to advance this agenda. So I'm going to close here just with the invitation that we actually talk about what are those policy solutions and what are those constraints, and how can actually we make sure that we solve those constraints in order to improve PTW safety. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andres. I think that image of the complexity systems map will stick with us as we move into this conversation. It sort of evokes a brain to me in some way, lots of different sort of neural pathways. Hopefully this conversation, as we move into the panel discussion, will move through some of that complexity and point to some of the different solution sets. It is really a delight to see many friends and colleagues in the room this morning. To those of you who I've not had the pleasure of meeting, My name is Ariana Childs-Graham. I'm the Program Director of Road Safety with the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. And we have the good fortune of working with many different civil society and government partners in 9 countries, ranging from in the Americas, Mexico and Colombia and Ecuador, to the other side of the globe in China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, India, as well as Uganda and Ukraine. And really diverse political contexts, context around road safety, and certainly powered 2- and 3-wheelers. I will just share also, one of the things that we have been doing with partners who are driving different policy and advocacy agendas have increasingly been looking at the impact of powered 2- and 3-wheelers, and do we have the right solution set in terms of the policies that are going to address those needs? Would welcome sharing with you, please look for me or my colleague, Roxane Paisible, along with others in our team. We have created a document, the Motorcycle Safety Imperative and Action Agenda, to address a growing public health and safety crisis. This reflects insights and innovations from many partners that we're working with in different contexts, and invite you to share that as well. I will invite our panel of speakers to join us at the front of the room. As they are coming up, I will introduce them, and then we'll move into 2 rounds of brief discussion questions, and then again hope to have a little bit of time at the end for questions from the audience as well. So I'll invite the panelists to come up to the front. To start, we've got Niels Lubbe, who's the Vice President and Director of Research at Autoliv, who specializes in vehicle safety technologies. And folks, if you want to just come on up, I'll introduce you as everyone is coming to the stage. Thank you. And then we also have Xiangrong Li, who's the researcher at the China Automotive Technology and Research Center, focusing on automotive safety. Mr. Tang Kim Lee, who is the Executive Vice Chairman of the Vietnam National Traffic Safety Committee, overseeing national traffic strategies for traffic safety and order. We also have Kazuyoshi Kuroki, who's the representative of the International Motorcycle Manufacturers Association, also the chair of the Road Safety Working Group, and focusing on education, awareness raising, and policy. Next, we've joined by Greg Smith, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the International Road Assessment Program, informing policy solutions for safer roads, followed by Irene Namuyiga, who's the General Manager of Operations at Safeway Rightway Uganda, as also a civil engineer and transport planner connecting advocacy to impact. And of course, last but not least, we are joined by Esteban Diaz-Ru, who is the Operations Senior Advisor in the Transport Division at the Inter-American Development Bank, specializing in development financing for transportation projects. Thank you and welcome. So we will get started with our first round of questions, and Niels, you will kick things off for us. Wanted to ask you, what are the specific safety needs for child passengers, and what are some of the technological solutions that exist?
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me here, and thank you for that question. So I think what I want to start is, I think there are quite some similarities between children and adult motorcycle riders. And to put the elephant in the room maybe first, I think it will not be as safe as being in a car with a big metal cage around you, or being in a bus, or walking without the chance of being hit by something bigger. I don't think we'll get motorcycling as safe, neither for adults nor for children. But the good thing is, I think we can get it a lot safer than what it is today. So there's work to do, we can make it safer, but I don't think it will ever get to that level that we can get with other modes of transport. Then I also think between child passengers and adult riders on motorcycles, there are similarities on what kind of injuries will likely lead to fatalities. So it's head injuries, it's thorax injuries. They are these injuries that lead to fatality, so the body regions, the head, the thorax, that's what we need to protect. I'm not the first one to being asked this question, so I actually would like to go back to a paper from 2018 from the KMU-TNB, the University in Northern Bangkok, Thailand, and MIROS, the Malaysian Road Safety Institute, where they studied exactly that question, where should you put a child if that's on a motorcycle? And what they found out, if you put the child in the front, which you may want to do to see where the child is, what it's doing, to have control, to prevent from falling off during riding, what you end up with is the adult behind in a frontal impact putting a lot of loading from the back. So there's the handle or can be stiffer structures in the front. You get loading from the back, and that can lead to quite substantial and drastic thoracic injuries if you have the loading from both sides. So you end up in a squeezing situation. If you put the child on the back, there's the chance to fly off and to fly quite high and wide and then potentially hit something with the head. So in that particular paper, in that particular study, the child did impact the roof rail of the passenger car, which was the crash opponent, with the head, and that led to very high acceleration values measured in the head, potentially leading to fatal injuries. So there's really no good answer between these two options. What those researchers recommended in their paper is, well, you should probably put the child in the back, in a child seat, with a helmet on. But that was what they concluded would probably be good in that paper. What we did at Autoliv, we did similar set of tests with the child in the back, with the child in the front, and presented this the first time in 2024 in December in the WHO site event in Guangzhou on child passengers on power two-wheelers. And we can confirm that we see similar kinematics. If the child's in the front, the adult behind will put substantial loading on the child. If the child is in the back, it can fly off high and wide. So I think the initial thought is still there, but I would add, for a child restraint system in the back, I think we would need some sort of release mechanism. Otherwise, one could easily end up in a similar situation. The child being strapped on the motorcycle slides along, hits some object, and then you have the loading from the motorcycle in the back. So that's not very good either. So I'm thinking of some sort of child restraint that maybe with a tilt sensor, and once the motorcycle tilts too much, you know, okay, this is not a normal riding situation anymore, and you release the child seat in the back. And for the helmet, I think also that is generally, of course, a good idea. Helmets are very effective protection measures. We know that. They are also for children. But for very small children, I think this won't work because of the weak necks. So in Sweden, we recommend rearward-facing child seats in cars exactly for that reason. A child can't support even the own weight of the head in a frontal impact. It would lead to neck injuries likely. So for very small children, I don't think the head will help, and I don't have a good solution for very small children on motorcycles.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And a small housekeeping note to the rest of the panel. We've been advised by our colleagues here that we're going to switch from the handheld mics to the table mics. So when it's your turn to speak, just press the button and share your remarks. Thank you. Moving down the line, would like to ask Xiangrong Li a question on, similarly, how can we better protect child passengers on PTWs? I think this is, as you've alluded, one of the areas where there are perhaps more questions than answers, but increasingly we're finding more answers to those questions. So interested in hearing your thoughts as well.
Thanks, Ariana. And we all know in globally, research on child passenger on PTW is really scaled. But the child is the most vulnerable VRU. So at the guide of WHO, we try to have some exploration on this research. And I need to say that we just began this research, so we haven't have the definitely conclusion. And in our research, we choose 3 scenarios. That means front, side, and rear end impact, car to two-wheelers. And in these 3 scenarios, we choose the two-wheelers speed is 15 kilometers per hour because we get this speed from our accident data from CDAS. And the car speed we choose to 40 kilometers per hour. Another way, another thing I need to say that because you know, until now we haven't good test technology to support this research, so we use the simulation, computer simulation, CE, to begin our research. Until now, we first finished our side impact matrix simulation and get some pre-results. So I would like to show you something. And we used two models in this simulation. One is a 3 years old child, another is the female adult in this simulation. And one result is, first I want to say that we have discovered that in these side impact scenarios, the speed of two-wheeler has less effect about, to the injury, but the car speed have the significant influence the injury. So that means if we want to reduce the injury for child on the PTW, on the two-wheeler, we need to control the car speed. It is also aligned with the recommendation in global plan developed by WHO in urban area, where is a typical mix of road user like cars, PTW, and pedestrian, a maximum speed limited of 30 kilometers per hour. We also found in our simulation when the child on the front, and in this situation maybe the chest injury risk will be high. And when the child on the rear, the head injury risk will be high. And we also found if we use just a simple resistant system, something like just a simple belt, it's almost no effect protection to the child. So I want to say that we will continue our research, and next we will begin the front impact and rear end impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really looking forward to all the insights that are coming forward from that, and really appreciate that you're looking at modeling that's mirroring who the users are, and making that available. So thank you. Next, we'll move to Mr. Tang, and wanted to also hear your insights as well. How has Vietnam approached young rider safety, and particularly including helmet use?
Thank you, Adriana. Good morning, everyone. So I'm very glad to be here to share with you some knowledge in Vietnam relating to the 2 and 3-wheel powers motor. When we talk about the young riders, it means we talk about the group of people around 16 to 24 years old. Of course, it depends on the different country. So due to lack of experience, low levels of compose, calmness, and impulsiveness, they often drive the higher speed and may violate the regulation. So the risk of the traffic crash and accidents are very high. So in Vietnam, the traffic injuries and traffic accidents relating to the motor 2 and 3 wheels is up to 59%. So it's too high. So in Vietnam now, traffic safety for young riders has been given considerable attention. So we apply the first is in the law to stipulate that all the pupils riding motorbikes 2 or 3 wheel, scooter, electric bike, electric motorbike must be wearing the helmet. That's the first thing to protect them. The second is from 16 to 18 years old, according to the new regulation, there must be sufficient knowledge and skill to drive a vehicle. In the third, we asking for responsibility of the parents. If the parents allow the children without enough skill, enough condition to ride the bikes on the traffic, and something happens, so we penalty for the parents also. That's a very new approach with us. And the fourth, we create the coordination very close between the police, between the school, and between the family to share information that the pupils, the children may be violent. So another thing is we put the traffic safety education to young people in formal school program. And driving, and one of the new things, we manage the driver license by point. It means when if violent, the point will be deducted, and the students have to retake again course and test for the new one. And of course, we apply very high penalties, and parallel that is a public awareness campaigns always to the young riders. So that's some approach from the Vietnam to manage the young riders. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that there's not one single entry point, but that you're looking at multiple different ways of reaching the same constituencies and how to address that. Thank you. Moving now to Kiroki, and you've been very clear that when you talk about innovations, it's not just a technological innovation, right? And certainly your specialty is in engaging with different audiences and really wanting to connect with what some of the solutions are. So we'd be curious to hear from you, what are some of the industry innovations that are showing promise in protecting vulnerable Power 2 and 3-wheel users?
Okay, thank you, Ariana, and thank you for inviting us today, and it is very happy for us to be here. So at first, let me introduce our association briefly. So we are Global Motorcycle Manufacturers Association, and we collaborate with the international regulatory and policy formats such as WB1, 29, ITF, and WHO to promote the motorcycle as a safe, sustainable, and social responsible and affordable mobility solutions. So just 3 days ago, we published our latest road safety white paper, and which outlined our perspectives, strategies, and good practice from all over the world. So we ask you to visit our website for more detail, and we have also such kind of brochure at our booth. So please feel free to stop by our booth. Okay, so going back to the question. So at first, we would like to emphasize the motorcycle road safety requires a different approach from automobiles. So motorcycle is quite different from automobiles in terms of the vehicle characteristics, users' characteristics, and also usage environment. So it is true the automobile safety measures have advanced due to the technology innovation, but for the motorcycle, it is essential to first establish fundamental measures such as education, appropriate enforcement before implementing the technology. That is the motorcycle safety approach. So this sequence is very, very important for the motorcycle safety. So I understand I understood that you may expect us to solve that problem by technology innovation. So, but we believe, So we believe that innovation in another area is also important for the motorcycle. So in particular,
road safety education is one of the most important things, especially for the LMICs. To reduce motorcycle accident, we must improve riders' safety awareness and risks, skills, through safety education. And through safety education, the rider can get proper understandings of the traffic situation and the environment and the riding capabilities, and allowing them to predict and avoid scale. So this fundamental solution is key to reducing the accident, and moreover, providing all riders, from beginner to skilled riders, with the necessary knowledge and the skill for safe riding will contribute to creating a safer society. So it is also essential to enhance awareness among drivers of automobiles, because they share the road with motorcycles. So by implementing overall road user safety awareness, we can develop mutual understandings and the cooperation, thereby creating a safer riding environment for the motorcyclist. So in line with this thought, we motorcycle industry actively promote road safety education for users and the society. But the direction we should aim for is to establish an education system that empower each rider with self-protection capabilities. So currently, we industry provide various education and training programs, but the reaching all riders remain still challenging in this field. So, but however, currently, many technology is advanced, such as IT, digital solutions, such kind of technologies, so that we believe that using such kind of technology to provide widespread education to training, and the training will drive significant innovation in road safety educations. So, of course, we understand technological innovation remains essential, but however, no matter how advanced the technology may be, it will not be effective unless it is made available at an affordable price for the users, especially for the LMIC regions.
Thank you. That's
Yes,
really
thank you.
appreciate your remarks. And I think that we could maybe borrow from your words and rename this session. We need a different approach for motorcycles than we do for automobiles. Really appreciate that very succinct way of capturing the complexity that we're working through. And I think, Greg, you know perhaps as well as anyone up here that in considering the design of roads, you can't necessarily have the same approach for cars as for motorcycles. So as you're thinking about the complexity there, would appreciate your thoughts on infrastructure adaptations that are the most critical when thinking about the safety of PTW users.
Yeah, thanks, Ariana, and thank you all for taking part in this session today, which is incredibly important. We saw in the Global Status Report the blooming problem of road deaths due to motorcycle crashes. And I think one of my first points when it comes to road design and road infrastructure is to say that we need to recognize that powered two-wheelers are a legitimate form of transport, and they're not transitory, they're here to stay. I say that many of you maybe have fully accepted that already, but when it comes to road design, I think there is a fundamental sort of perhaps unspoken assumption that it's a transitory issue. As a country develops economically, people like to move from low-cost motorcycles to vehicles, and I don't think that that pattern is emerging, and I think motorcycles will be here for the long term. So we need to include that in our strategies and plans. Also, I think it's important to recognize that this is complex. It's been said several times before. There's many different types of powered two-wheelers. They serve different purposes in different places, and they travel on all sorts of different roads. And so it makes it quite difficult to generalize when it comes to the road design about how we should respond to the emerging issue. But we can generalize about some things, and I'll come to that shortly. But just to give you a few examples of the things that need more research and more knowledge when it comes to infrastructure. For example, we don't know yet a great deal about what the changing mix of motorcycles versus vehicles means in a different country. If you're in a city and 10% of your vehicles are motorcycles, what does that mean for risk? If 50% are motorcycles, what does that mean for risk? If 90% of the vehicles are motorcycles, what does that mean for risk in your jurisdiction? And many countries are going through a transition where the percentage is growing and the risk patterns change significantly. We need more research in that area. We also know that some of the countermeasures that you would use in infrastructure, some of them feel very logical that you should do, but actually the results are counterintuitive often. So there are treatments that are being tried. People assume that they're going to work well for powered two-wheelers, but they don't necessarily, and we need more evidence about that to understand better how we incorporate them at the right time, in the right place throughout the network. We also know that the speeds are incredibly important for all road users. When it comes to motorcycles, generally speaking, 30 kilometres an hour is a tipping point for pedestrian safety, motorcyclists hitting pedestrians. 60 kilometres an hour is a bit of a tipping point for motorcycle riders. Once you get beyond that speed, the risk pattern and risk experience changes substantially. You start getting vast differences between the speeds of the motorcycles and the other vehicles on the road, which introduces all sorts of new levels of risk. So there's a lot that we need to learn and we need to understand, and so research is going to be an important part of this. But there are some very clear statistics that we can act on very quickly. So with the International Road Assessment Program methodology, partners all around the world have used it to assess their roads. We can see in that data, across all the global data, there's more than 500,000 kilometres of roads that have motorcycles on them that have been assessed using the methodology. That's across 82 countries. Here's some of the things that have been found. 1 in 3 roads reaches the 3-star rating or better out of 5 for motorcyclists, so just 1 in 3. 67% of roads are at the 1 or 2-star level. We know if you move a road from 1 star to 2 stars, you're going to halve the crash cost per kilometre travelled. If you go from 2 to 3, you're going to halve it again. So if we're able to get that 67% that's still 1 or 2 star up towards 3 star, we are going to make substantial improvements in crashes and risk. 4 out of 10 of those roads, people are travelling on their motorcycles faster than the posted speed limit. So that means, of course, enforcement is a part of this, but also designing the road network so that people do not go faster, they can't go faster on those roads is incredibly important. And earlier I mentioned there's one, it's difficult to generalise, but I'm going to say speed is one that we can generalise on. If we can get everyone travelling within a safe speed limit, and those speed limits set in accordance with safe system principles, we will make dramatic improvements in terms of risk for motorcyclists. Just 22% of intersections have protected turn lanes or they're compact, which substantially reduces the risk for motorcyclists, just 1 out of 5. So many intersections are ready for improvement that we know will improve the experience for motorcyclists. Half of the intersections have street lighting. Street lighting is incredibly important for nighttime riding, for visibility. And it of course has that spillover benefit for pedestrians and all the other road users as well. Less than 1 in 3 of the roads have a median separation of some type, meaning that head-on crashes are physically possible on those roads. If we can lift that even a little bit, it'll substantially reduce the risk of head-on crashes on roads.
Thank you, Greg. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So just 0.2% of roads have a motorcycle lane. Very, very few. And that is one of those topics that is controversial. A motorcycle lane is not going to solve the problem completely, but it's incredibly important. So, sorry, Ariana, just...
No need to apologize. And thank you for your remarks. And certainly, I think that gives us a lot to think about when you lead with motorcycles are here to stay, that, of course, we need to look at short-term solutions that will immediately address the really devastating effects of death and injury that are resulting. But we also need to be thinking about medium and long-term solutions as well, trying to have that kind of agility and forecasting to think where is this moving in each particular context in each country. We'll continue down the line here with our panelists, and I know, Irene, you were responding, in the last day or so to some late-breaking data about the impact in Uganda, and certainly there's a high prevalence of motorcycle use as a public transportation, but also a high fatality rate among both motorcyclists and passengers. What are some of the policy solutions that you would recommend to be able to address that?
Thank you very much, Ariana, and good morning to everyone. I'll go deep in. I'll start with the mandatory registration of the motorcycle industry. Currently, we don't have a database, and everybody has said it. If you can't measure it, you cannot solve it. Consequently, we have estimations. Some will say 350,000, some will say 500, some will say 1 million, others will say 1.5. We really don't know how many motorcyclists we have. So consequently, we are not able to solve anything around the motorcycle industry. So if our police crime report is showing an increase, by the way, yesterday we had the release of the 2024 crime report, and it showed an increase of the fatalities around the motorcycle industry, and that's at 13.2 from 10.1 in 2023. So really it's an issue, but we don't know how to measure it and we cannot solve it. So with that, I would go for the database first, because it's critical. And then I would go for the mandatory digitization, because I believe it would support the numbers. It would bridge the gap between the government and the people and the riders. It would be able to support the zoning, the enforcement, and also it would support the routes and the work areas. Where we're at, we'll have people coming from the west, from the east, and all come to the CBD or the city, and they'll all be able to ride. And that's not correct, because the transit or the commutes are totally different when you come from the different areas. The travel patterns are totally different, and that shouldn't be happening. If you come into the city, at most you should be able to maybe park your motorcycle and be able to take the different other modes of transportation. So I would go for that as well. And then the other one I would look at is to have some barriers to entry into the motorcycle industry for public transportation. That is not there. And why would I do that? I'd have maybe a limit to the age of entry. Currently, maybe would say 18, but an 18-year-old is young. Even a 21-year-old is young. They are at the level of risk. So we are entrusting 40-year-olds with 18-year-olds to ride them. What is that? It's not okay. So I'll put a barrier to entry in age, in regards to age. I'll put maybe a minimum training level, a certain minimum training level, and go for maybe some kind of insurance. Anyone who pays a certain fee will be more aware of the penalties that are concerned with that. So I'd also go for a certain level of knowledge or road safety knowledge. So I'd actually put some barriers to ensure that whoever is getting into this industry has a certain kind of a penalty or knowledge or anything. I'll put a certain level of technology level that is basic. That is not happening right now. I'd also put a certain knowledge of maybe regulation and traffic signs, which is not current. People are learning from their backyards or from friends. So I'll put maybe barriers to entry in that regard. And then I think we need to curb importation of motorcycles. We have reached our peak. When you look at our junctions during peak hours, it's not okay. What is happening currently is not okay. I'll put a curb and then assess the need. Then maybe we are able to reorganize the sector before we actually open up. We currently have people importing parts of motorcycles and assembling motorcycles in the country. We don't know anything, so I'll probably curb the importation, assess what is happening, maybe register the ones who are assembling, register whoever has stock, then I'm able to know what do we have, what is the need that is there. I know everybody says motorcycles are here to stay. Yes, that is true. But what is the actual need? We cannot tell that. So I'll probably curb importation and be able to assess the need that is in the country. And then maybe the other one I'd look at is I'd professionalize the industry and then have some level of public transport professional attachment to it. We call it a public transport now, but there's no professionalism to it. Every public transport has a professional background to it. But if it's a public transport mode, have we made it an actual professional public transport? So I would really professionalize it in regards to public transport. And in conclusion, I would love to make it a choice. Right now, it's the only thing. The congestion is too much, so you find that you'll park your vehicle, jump out of your car, and sit on a motorcycle. In that moment, you won't have a helmet, your rider won't have a helmet, because it's the only choice. So honestly speaking, I would make it a choice. In that regard, I would go for maybe mass transit, make sure that our mass transit systems are working so that even if I'm choosing, I know that I have maybe a helmet in my car, and it's not just the only option that is left. I'm able to choose from the different modes of transportation. I can either walk or ride, or if I'm choosing to go for the motorcycle, it is a choice that I have made. I'm not in a disparate situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. What a critical question to ask. Are people actually making the choice? I think certainly we need to look at this idea that motorcycles are here to stay, but what choices are people making about using motorcycles? Let's move down to the end of the panel here with Esteban. And certainly you are looking not only at individual country contexts, but across different countries as well. And curious what your thoughts are, from a development perspective. What are some of the barriers when you're thinking about implementing some of these proven safety interventions for Power 2 and 3-wheelers?
Thank you, Ariane, and good morning to everybody. From the bank's point of view, we obviously work in Latin America, and when we talk about barriers to implementation of what we know works, in the region of Latin America, at least, one of the main barriers that we have is, first, what happened, we didn't expect it. Motorcycles were more for recreational use until 15 or 20 years ago. And the increase that we've seen in the usage of motorcycles has been dramatic. And again, nobody expected this. We're talking about rates in some countries of over 200% in the last 10 years. The growth rate is exponential. It's more than double what we're seeing for private automobiles. And policymakers were not ready for this. And that's, I think, the first barrier, just that we were surprised. The second barrier is there are severe economic constraints when we talk about road safety or any type of safety investments, and we have to deal with that. Basically, most of our cities, Latin America right now is heavily urbanized. I think it has the highest urbanization rate in the world, have grown dramatically. They have enormous needs, and people request resources for lots of things that the cities needs. And unfortunately, when we talk about issues related to road safety, and specifically motorcycle safety, it's a long-term cost or better said, that's a long-term benefit when you make these investments with a short-term cost. And that tends to be not a very strong incentive to spend money when you have fiscal constraints. So a lot of things that we know work, they cost money, and money's not available, and when you have to prioritize budgets, unfortunately, they're not exactly the ones that are first on the list. The last issue I would raise is also the perception of risk, and this is very much related to the first thing I mentioned. We didn't expect this. We don't know how to deal with motorcycles. Drivers don't know how to drive motorcycles, or a lot of them really don't know that well how to drive. This is complicated by licensing requirements, which maybe are not that that good or are not even complied with. Automobile drivers don't know how to drive with motorcycles in the road too. And policymakers don't know how to implement policies to improve safety. So the surprise factor and the perception of risk also has a big impact on how we deal with them. And the last thing I want to say, and this is very much related to what my colleague here just mentioned and Ariana mentioned, we want to make sure that people actually have the option and have the choice of either using motorcycles or not. And here the issue is that we failed in providing public transportation systems that provided an adequate level of service. And people migrated to the motorcycle. And we know that once somebody's on a bike, it's very difficult to get them off. But we do think that we have to make more investments and improve our public transportation systems to make sure that it is a choice, that people that are on the bikes, they really want to be on a bike and they don't have any other option. And to do this, we have to increase how much we invest in public transportation. And I think that that's also a failure that we had. The fact that our public transportation systems didn't work well enough is the main reason why people have migrated to motorbikes.
Thank you for that. I think in this room we can all agree that speed is something that we want to limit. In this next round, however, we are going to encourage speed. We'll do a 1-minute response each so that we can then move to some questions from the panelists and questions from the folks in the room as well. So no pressure, Nils, with your 1-minute response. What are some of the approaches that have worked for making safety technology affordable?
So I think the transportation industry is one of the industries where economies of scale work quite well. So if you produce enough of something, you can probably make it rather cheap. So how can we get more of safety technology out there? I think rating tends to be making it mandatory for a base level, and it's rather slow to develop new regulations. So I think rating would be the way to go here. I think we've seen the first approaches to this with the MyMap rating program in Malaysia, where we see some rating of motorcycle safety. If we can get that out in the world, preferably in a harmonized way, so we have a similar set of requirements, a similar set of performance targets we want to achieve, so we can develop solutions to meet these targets worldwide, I think we can go to the economies of scale. And what I think here is what we can do is have a performance rating for motorcycle safety, where we can even include things like equipment. So I was talking about child safety before. One could test motorcycle safety, including child riders. Then I think an OEM, a manufacturer, can choose which equipment the rider for this test should be equipped with, what kind of helmet, inflatable vests, child seats should be used, as long as you can buy it at the dealership. I think that's a very good OEM recommendation. So I think we can push a lot with ratings, include equipment, and then those that are safety conscious can choose for their private purchases to choose the safer motorcycle with the safe equipment, or we can go with the procurement from public or commercial entities when it's their employees, and they have provide them for the employees, or public for the people employed in the public offices, that they can choose then only those safer motorcycles with the equipment. So I would think rating, global, international performance rating, that's the way to go.
Great, thank you. So I'll pass the challenge of the 1-minute response along to you as we shift back to testing protocols. What are some of the testing protocols that are going to be most effective?
Okay, thank you, Arina. Qatar not just take the national automotive industry standard, we also manage the CNCAP, that means China New Car Assessment Program. As the manager of CNCAP, I would like to share some of our practice. And in our new version, at active safety, we have application of technology to the AEB, and that means the first the AEB test with the child dummy as target require the vehicle to recognize stationary or moving child dummy and automotively brake when the speed in 20 or to 60 kilometers per hour. And the second is the child detection and braking function while reversing in parking lots. and use camera or radar to recognize the child is there. And this testing item have significantly improved the precision and the system response speed. And in the future, ThinkCAP will perform A/B testing for younger child, for example, 1 to 3 years old child in the A/B testing. And we will also think about the application of tricycle targets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and want to just highlight again how groundbreaking the analysis is that you're doing and looking at the impact on young children on motorcycles, and really appreciate the work that you're doing on the anti-lock braking as well. Mr. Tang, how does Vietnam address the challenge of underage and unlicensed riders as well?
Thank you. As I mentioned, Vietnam has applied many solutions to manage young riders for safety. But unfortunately, the young riders without driver license is still a challenge. To address these issues, I do think that we have to implement a mix of legal measures, education, enforcement, and community engagement. So for the legal frame in Vietnam now, under the laws, we classify the age to allow to drive the kinds of the motorbike. Like under 16 years old, they cannot ride the motorbikes over 50 cc. Just only like a electric bike. Yeah. The 16 to 17 years old cannot ride the bike, can only ride bikes with the lesser than 50 cc. And over 18, they can obtain the A1. It's mean the motorbikes above 50 cc, something like that. And we apply the fine and penalties. All the unlicensed riders face a fine. And parents allowing the children to ride the illegals can be fined. And if the accident happened from them, the legal responsibility may extend to the parents. As I mentioned, it's the strengthening enforcement. We, from the police, we conduct the periodic crackdown, and practically near the school, and in the city, dense city like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, we have the checking point near the school gate to check the ungrading riders. And we apply the new technology, such as the traffic cameras, to help the track and fight the violence.
Thank you.
So another school-based education, as I mentioned, and of course the communities and parental involvement must be taken to manage all the young people and young riders. Thank you.
Thank you, and really appreciate that you're looking at both sort of those positive, proactive approaches with parents' education, engagement, but that there are also penalties as well. And I know that this is a live question in many different country contexts. The coalition partners that our team works with in Colombia are supporting legislative efforts around motorcycle safety, and I know that this aspect on the penalties for underage riders is part of that conversation as well. We're looking at sort of different sectors that are working here together. We know how critical it is to have those regulatory frameworks. Can you tell us a little bit about the partnership or how the regulatory frameworks and industry innovation can work together?
Okay, thank you. So the question answer is a little bit simple. So that is we have to collaborate we private sector and public sector have to collaborate to develop the truly effective frameworks. So to achieve this, so I believe that we have the important role, both of us, and also important ensure that carry out our roles. So for our private sector, we know the reality through the many customers and all over the world. So therefore, when public sector consider the framework, we can provide such kind of the reality of the users. So therefore, we would like the authority to take such kind of reality into their thought and consider the framework that can that is truly effective for the customer and the society. So therefore, I believe that creating an environment where both private and public sector can observe and understand the reality, and then so discuss what solution and what framework is truly effective. Such kind of environment is needed. This is my answer.
Thank you. Certainly having those open communication pathways and dialogue, what can you learn from each other? Greg, you talked a little bit about that not treating cars and motorcycles in the same way. What are some of the other considerations that you take when thinking about other road users as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that motorcyclists hit pedestrians, motorcyclists can hit bicyclists, motorcyclists get hit by trucks and cars. And look, I think if I was put in charge of a jurisdiction, whether it's a city or a country or a province, I would take 4 key steps to integrate all the road users. Firstly is a transport strategy. So you're consciously planning how people will move around your city or your province in a planned way. And very importantly, I completely agree with Esteban, public transport needs to be a really important part of that so that people do have choice. But also a functional hierarchy of roads so that we know the purpose of each road and we're not mixing uses. We know when you get mixed use of freight, for example, with local communities and schools, it's a terrible combination and we can plan to avoid that. Secondly, I would systematically measure risk throughout my network for all road users, not just vehicles, but motorcyclists, pedestrians, and bicyclists, and give them safety performance ratings. This is the same as our colleague from AutoLive was talking for the equipment. So you have a data-driven understanding of where the risks are. Update design standards so that motorcyclists, pedestrians, and bicyclists are explicitly included in any road maintenance, improvements, or upgrades that happen. And then begin implementing, and very importantly, evaluate the effect of the implementation. We don't have enough evidence and data yet about the improvements that are being made to roads in low and middle income countries. If we can get that data and that research driving back into our transport strategies and our design standards, we will get a virtuous circle of improvements quite quickly. So that's the 4 steps I would take. Ariana?
Thank you. Strategy is, saying the word strategy is the direct route to my heart. I think it's really critical when we're really connecting to purpose and then how to move forward in achieving that. Irene, certainly road users' behavior, how folks are interacting and making decisions as they're driving is a critical component. We've talked about other aspects around vehicles and the roads, safe roads as well. What are some of the effective strategies of engaging with young riders to promote safety?
Thank you. Interestingly, the motorcycle industry, as informal as it is in my country, they do have leadership, so they actually would like to be formalized. So we have engaged their leadership, and we found that we had better penetration with their leadership, and they listen and respond to their leadership. So when we try to impose our methodologies on our own, it didn't work. So training and skilling their leadership, and then using their leadership to train them and skill them and pass on our road safety messages had a better impact, and that is what seems to work. And then secondly, we had to localize the road safety messages into something more understandable, something a bit less technical to a more palatable, if I should say it that way, something that is more I cannot say, I've forgotten the word, but something that they could easily integrate into some that is easy for them to understand. So we had to localize it as much as possible and also use local languages. We had to go away from the English that we speak in the boardrooms and in the classrooms and use our local languages and get people that speak their languages and use the different operators and their leadership to speak the languages that they did understand and use slang, if that is the right word, yeah, so that they could be able to understand. We had to go for the, what are they called? The people that in societies that are more influencers, I think they're called influencers. We had to use the influencers that are normally you wouldn't listen to, but they understand them, and those are the people that they did respond to. So that's what we went for. And then of course we found that having more prolonged interventions, not 1 or 2 months, but year after year, you say the same message, you have the same message, you may change a bit, but it's the same message, had a better effect on them, and you had to use the same people or different people, but you have the same message and work with them on the ground. That had a better impact on them. And then the one that I think we all would have probably underscored but had better impact is the collaboration between the different stakeholders. We had government agencies, NGOs, CSOs, the operators, the schools, the private sector, everybody came on board, media, and when we come down to doing the different interventions, we have key people coming on board and working together and saying the same messages at the different marked out days, and you found that we had better impact and were able to reach people, and people were able to respond to some of these things. And then the final one, the second last one, we integrated road safety back into the school curriculum. As much as our generation has a bit of a gap, we found that now having schools integrating the road safety into the education curriculum is going to have a generation that is more aware of what is expected of them in road use and has a better road user behavior than the one that is probably above them. And we're trying to see that the highway code is integrated in the education system, and we're having the different modes of transportation, the safer modes of transportation integrated in there, the different signs and regulations integrated in there. We're working with the Ministry of Education and having them integrating in the music, dance, and drama. We have different themes coming up in that, and we have so many other ways that are creatively introducing road safety in that. And then in conclusion, we are having the behavior change in Uganda as using our political wing to be more committed, not just willing. We say they are willing, but to be more committed to some of these road safety issues, because ultimately we do need the funding to be able to implement the interventions, and if we don't have the funding, we can't be able to do it. And what we maybe have to do more is to push for more commitment from them, so that they're able to fund more of the enforcement and implementation measures. Thank you so much. And thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And to conclude our lightning round here, Esteban, we've certainly been looking at, when thinking about motorcycle safety, people's lives and livelihoods, right? So when you're thinking about how development financing is structured, what are some of the ways to incentivize thinking of not only safety, but also the economic opportunities?
Thanks. First, I think that we have to make a better case in linking economic development to safety. This is obviously an enormous personal issue, but it's also an economic issue. This has a cost. It has a short-term cost. It has a long-term cost, and we have to make a better case for these investments. There is a strong economic case to make, and I think that we're not making it that well. The second issue is we have to incorporate the private sector in here. A lot of the increase in motorcycle usage are, for example, fleets of delivery services. The commute is part of work. People have to get to work and have to get home after work. And we think that businesses also have to take the responsibility that they have to make sure that their employees are taken care of. And we have ways through government, through regulation, but also through financial incentives that we can make sure that the private sector does their part. The third thing is I think that we have to really start funding some of the technological solutions that we have better. Technology can be a really important tool. Some things were mentioned here, ABS, we have velocity control systems, we have helmet detection systems. There's a lot of things that we can do. Let's fund them. They work, we know they work, we can do this. And the last thing is I think that also from the development bank perspective, I gotta be honest here, we don't like motorbikes, okay? We never have. They undermine our public transportation systems. All the increases that we've had in road safety in the last 10 years have been erased by the increase in motorcycles. But they're here, and they provide accessibility, and they do have an important role to play, and they're not going away. So we have to do a better job of taking them into account and make sure that in all our loans, both in infrastructure investing and when we work on policy advice and policy loans with governments, that they take them into account. Again, they're not going away, so let's make sure they're safe.
Thank you, and appreciate your candor on your position on motorcycles as well, and making the connection to the private sector when thinking about economic opportunities. What is their role? What are the responsibilities? And certainly looking at many quickly evolving industry sectors around the transportation and delivery as well that rely on motorcycles. Thank you to the panelists. We will have about 5 or so minutes, maybe 5 to 7, depending on when we get kicked out of the room. We'll start off by taking 2 or 3 questions from the panel, then invite about 2 or 3 questions from the floor, and then I'd like to invite the panelists to respond to the questions. So is there anyone on the panel who'd like to raise a question to anyone else among the speakers? All right, they are generously giving all of their questions to the folks on the floor. So I'm just going to point out to you first, and then I'll ask you to give your questions. I hear in the front row, gentleman here in the middle. See, yes, sir, your hand is raised in the back. Yep, I see you about a third of the way back. Thank you. Any other questions? I see, yeah. So we'll take those questions, and if we have time for another round, we'll invite them. So please share your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rihanna. And I want to thank the panelists for the good input and information which they have shared with us, especially from us where countries which are having so many motorcycles. Good enough, one of the panelists come from Uganda. Now, from the discussion, Ariana, I think I'm not going to pose any question to them, so they should not get worried. I am only making observations. One is that most of these motorcycles are here to stay in some of the cities, and therefore we must look for a way of dealing with them. I like that last statement where my friend says that the development partners don't like these motorcycles, and therefore you must look for a way of planning for them. Now, I've seen also one of the panelists, I think, come from Vietnam. Recently, we had a workshop in Kigali about some of these motorcycles. And I think we had a colleague from Vietnam who said, in some parts of the country, the roads are designed for motorcycles, not even for vehicles. So in other words, you cannot have a vehicle in that particular country, but you need to have motorcycles. What is key, and I think the point I picked that day, was that these motorcycles or the riders must have strong regulation that regulate them. Standard motorcycles, and make sure that the riders are well trained. So in some countries, you are not going to run away from that. Number 2, these competing resources, especially in African context, for some cities not to focus so much on other forms of public transport because of the heavy investment of public transport like mass transport. Of course, I know most cities would want to move upgrade to transit, BRTs and the rest, but these are challenges. So the inadequacy of public transport, again, forces most cities to engage themselves in these motorcycles.
Thank you,
What are we,
Commissioner.
I just want to propose in a minute. One is that we need to look at helmets. I think we have talked about these helmets that conform to standards to reduce head injuries, because our statistics show that actually most of these riders and passengers, the head injuries are on the increase. Can we also look at technology of these motorcycles with limited speed, so that we have motorcycles which are not going to speed? And finally, like what Irene said, organizing them into groups and also have better stages, so that when we get money as African governments, then we continue upgrading to public transport, mass transport, and these motorcycles ultimately will phase out themselves once we have better means of transport in terms of mass transit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your observations, Commissioner. Yes, we'll take a question here.
My name is Deepak. I am from India. I am a journalist. I have a question for the automobile industry and all panelists. If everyone knows two-wheeler is the most vulnerable vehicle on the road, still we are promoting it. I think that's a very serious issue. Number two, if you come to our country, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, all these developing countries, now motorcycle manufacturers are selling their vehicles saying that you can accelerate from 0 to 90 km/h in just 60 seconds or maybe 20 seconds. So what kind of message we are giving? We are saying it's an unsafe vehicle, you have little protection, but at the same time, go for it because you can speed up quickly. Does it mean that we are creating a transport system for people to travel for smaller distance, or we are creating a bigger problem? That's my question.
Thank you. And I think our next question was over here. Yes, you.
Good morning, everybody. Our friend from the Inter-American Development Bank, he pointed to the fact that in many cases we weren't ready from a policy point of view for the rapid growth in this industry. Are we, just a question generally to the panel, are we in danger of being in the same position with Southern Africa, which well, the growth is there, but it's been slower than in East and West Africa. Yeah, just wondered if we were in danger of falling into the same traps that we did elsewhere.
And just to clarify, your question is about looking at rates of growth in terms of fleet size?
It's about being ready for the growth of that industry from a safety perspective, legislative-wise, and so forth.
Thank you. And I think, Maricela, your question was next. It looks like we're having a hard time with the microphone over here. Thank you, Mario. Why don't you just come up here? We've got a microphone coming. Thank you for your...
Now it can work.
Okay? So thank you very much for everyone. I just want to point out two topics that I think are very important for us to consider. One is the importance of working on driving permits for commercial use of motorcycles. I think as many countries, they don't have a special driving permit for motorcyclists in general, but as we demand also for commercial use or professional drivers permit, why are we not doing the same with motorcycles? I mean, they are also being professionalized, or they should, by carrying goods and people, and by putting them into higher risks many times. So what are we doing on that regard? That's on one side. And on the same angle, I think another elephant in the room is the washing hands from the industry and from many policy regarding the informality of this paratransit or informal public transport use of the motorbike. And by not having this formality around these services, either for delivery or using it as a public transport or informal public transport, yes, I agree with the need for as an opportunity for job creation. But on one side, we should consider that as well. Who needs these jobs, and they actually also need this social protection, and they also need this formality in terms of the hiring process, in terms of the insurance, for example, in terms of the driving permit, as I was saying. And if we really want to put this into place, we should also consider the actual users, meaning in many of our countries, we're talking about young people, young population, and in many of our countries, the poor population. Therefore, we should adapt also this driving permit for illiteracy, for example, because we cannot just put driving permits for people that cannot read. So just wanted to highlight those aspects, and if there's anything being considered on that. Thanks.
Thank you for those questions. And we will take responses to those 3 questions, just acknowledging that we are staying between you and coffee. So if folks need to vote with their feet and move on, you are, of course, welcome to do so. But just to recap the 3 questions that we received so far, one was about looking at sort of vehicle standards, right? How, if there are vehicles that have the capability of going very high speeds, what is being done to be able to cap those at the level of the vehicle itself? And then also in terms of thinking forward and forecasting to kind of rates of growth, Irene certainly touched on this, and the numbers that are entering the fleets that are in circulation in areas where that scale has not yet been reached. What is being done now to plan ahead and be able to respond appropriately to that increase in fleet size? And then certainly looking at the licensing piece as it relates to commercial licensing, and how are those who are creating regulatory frameworks really looking at the industry aspect, right? I think it was the Minister of Transport from Chile yesterday who sort of issued what I interpreted as a call to action to really look at those dimensions and how to find policy solutions, acknowledging that there are not only the same solutions that work for formal sector are not necessarily going to work in the informal sector, or kind of in that hybrid space, so how to adapt those as well. So would invite, and again, if you would keep your responses brief, anyone on the panel who'd like to respond to any of these questions. Irene? Mm-hmm.
I think I touched also Maricela's question as well. I mentioned that we should have barriers to entry into the motorcycle industry, especially for public transport. And I mentioned that this would go around the issue of age, minimum training, insurance, licensing, knowledge on road safety, regulation, traffic, technology. And what this would do is ideally to have some basic or a bit of level of the kind of quality of person that gets into this industry, basically because we get lives of people, or our normal people, the 40-year-olds, the professionals, and entrust them into the lives of the riskiest 18-year-olds, because our current age of drivers is 18, and they are learning from backyards or from friends, and they go onto the roads because there's no barrier to entry. So I mentioned that we should have some barriers to entry into this public transport, or at least for anyone getting into the motorcycle for public transport issue. And I also mentioned professionalizing the industry, because ultimately for any public transport, that is a minimum level of professionalism that is expected. And if you look back into any public transport and formalizing it and professionalism, there are issues of medical checks, alcohol and drug, and issues of testing on a daily basis, or any kind of permits, anything, enforcement, and all those things, if you look back into them, they are all capped in professionalizing and formalizing, and also in the barriers of entry. So if we are accepting that it's a means of public transport, then we have to go into the issues of, okay, let's professionalize it and formalize it and have some barriers to entry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other panelists who'd like to respond to any of the questions that were raised? Craig?
Yeah, I really appreciate the comment from India about the speed of motorcycles and the advertising about how fast they can go. I think one thing countries could consider doing is working with industry to ensure that advertising about motorcycles is ethical and moral. We know there's a very clear linkage between speed and risk of death. So therefore, advertising vehicles in terms of their ability to speed and act like racing bikes is completely unethical. So you know, a code of practice between industry to ensure there's common understanding about that maybe is a first step, and if that doesn't work, regulation could be a step. In terms of technology that was raised a couple of times in terms of speed, I would love to see trial projects of us working with geofencing in city areas so that you know, the vehicle is tracked. Once it crosses into a low speed zone, the technology ensures that that vehicle cannot go past that safe speed. We could start with industry in that area. In my region, Grab would be a great partner to begin working on that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of space for technology trials, and let us learn how it works and make models that we can expand.
Thank you, and we'll invite one final response from the panel if anyone would like to share. Niels?
Yeah, and I can be brief.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep. Thank you. So I think the geofencing, it has been successfully applied for e-scooters, it has been applied for public buses and so on. I think that is a great idea to see what we can do more with that. And I just wanted also to offer that if you wanted to run a campaign to show what happens if you crash a motorcycle at 100 kilometers, to show people, like we have crash test facilities, we have this kind of video. If you wanted to do your own approach to show people what does it mean to crash at 100 compared to 50, I think you can also with these kind of campaigns achieve something, and if you need material, can reach out to me.
And Esteban, please share the final word from the panel.
No, just on regarding speed, we all know speed sells and speed kills. And it's not just a question of regulations. We have speed limits. We can enforce speed limits. We have ways of controlling speed. We don't have the political will to do it because speed is popular and reducing speed is unpopular. And I think that until we don't really have that political will and as a society decide that we have to do this, it's not just a question of regulations. Speed limits have been there for ages. It's more than that. I think it's a change in the way that we think about speed and the way that we think about safety.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who has joined us today. I would encourage you to take a moment and pause and think about what is one takeaway that you'll bring with you from today's conversation. Is there an action you plan to take? Is there a burning question that surfaced in the session that you want to address? It is going to take everyone in this room and more when thinking about what the right solutions are, whether you're here wearing your hat from government, civil society, industry, the finance sector, and more. Everyone has a role to play, and I think the strong message that I heard, perhaps not said in as few words, but that all of us need to step up and make a contribution here. So thank you for joining, and thanks to our panelists as well.